All right, video two, where I have to do a voiceover because apparently, I don't know, I'm just not having a good day when it comes to AV stuff. So, um, I'm gonna comment real time on this video. Basically, this one is to take us through migrating from one external database server to another. The idea here is that if you have an aging external SQL server for Zerto purposes, and you want to move it to a newer one, currently we don't have an officially supported document on how to do that, but it's basically just some SQL commands. So nothing too complicated here. I'll go ahead and start the video. We can watch me ramble here to apparently just nobody. Um, but we'll jump over into the lab. I just want to clear the air here first, though. This process is not supported by Zerto, meaning you can't call Zerto support and expect them to help. So do your own research. Make sure if you have a SQL team that they help you out. The Zerto stuff isn't too hard. I do run into some trouble, I'm not gonna lie. But we work through it, and I'll show you how to work through it. I'll try not to fast forward through any of that. The video is only like 25 minutes long anyway, but um, you could probably cut that down to like 10 minutes had you not made the completely rookie mistake that I'm going to make here in probably about 15 minutes. So without any further ado, let's get started. If you watched internal to external migration video, you know that this is my SQL 1 box. I was basically playing around, making sure that the database had the data in it that it needed. That's just where I left this video. So we talk about some stuff here. I don't remember, probably wasn't important. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to move from uh, a server named ZSQL1, instance name ZSQL1, to a new server called ZSQL2, instance name ZSQL2. Another tip that I will explain later on is that I keep the same SA password for both. So I have the same username and password for both ZSQL1 and ZSQL2. This just simplifies it later. Um, Turns out that we must have a bug in the GUI. I originally tried to show you how to do it through the GUI, but it doesn't work. Spoiler alert. So we go in and we modify one file. It's really not a big deal, but we'll look to fix that here. I don't know, one of the upcoming releases. The the other thing I like to point out here is that when you're trying to shut down Zerto, if you remember back in the Windows days when you were going to do any database stuff, you just go into Windows Services, right click the service, tell it to stop, and then you could do whatever you needed to do, and then you could start it back up later. Because you can't just stop a service in Kubernetes, we'll walk through on how to basically scale it down, is what they call it. It's a fancy way of saying that we're going to just tell it, hey, you still have that service, just don't run it right now. What I'm doing here, by the way, is just verifying that I have two different SQL servers. Of course, I was logged in from one to the other here. This would have actually helped me if I'd have verified this exact same thing that I did for the first SQL later. Another spoiler alert. But yeah, so let's log in here. Yeah, this should have been, by the way, for those keeping track or have already fast forwarded. You notice that it's not connecting to the IP address. That's a hint as to the mistake I made later on. So I cancel here. I switch back to the name, and then it connects just fine. So that's probably what threw me off is that, oh yeah, look, it just worked. But what I'm showing you here is that there is no ZVM database on SQL 2. So we're going to move from SQL 1 to SQL 2. The first thing you got to do, though, is basically stop the ZVM service so it stops trying to write data in there. Not sure how much longer I ramble here. I'm going to fast forward a little bit and we'll see uh, where we get, maybe. My mouse just moved over, so guessing I'm going to grab the command prompt. Yep, there we go. All right, so what I did here is I logged into my ZVM into the CLI. I used SSH. You could theoretically do this via the VMware console if you wanted. You just don't have the luxury of copy paste. So if you SSH in, or if you don't have it turned on, make sure you do that. first thing I'll show you is just how to get everything that Kubernetes is doing. You'll want to go ahead and expand out the window though, because as you scroll up, you see it, things are multiple lines. So I go ahead and expand that out. And what we're looking here for is that the ZVM dash service stuff. So there's a replica set, a deployment, a service, and a pod, all that have the name ZVM service. The pod is what actually does the work. The service is what makes sure that the pod stays running. So if it dies, it'll restart it. The deployment creates the service. So there's multiple layers in Kubernetes, but the big thing that we're trying to do here is we need to get rid of the pod. We need to make sure it's not running. Which in some guides we just say, "Hey, kill the pod." Well, then the service will automatically restart it. So we actually have to stop it at like the deployment layer so that the service knows, hey, I don't need to restart him right now. So eventually, I get done talking here. I will scroll down and throw that command in to scale us down to 0. It's like, here we go. Yep, there we go. So cube control, scale, tells it to go up or down. We're going to scale the deployment. Our deployment name is just CVM-service, so we'll type that in. And then we say dash dash replicas equals 0. This basically says right now I don't want any pods for this deployment. Takes just a second. If you run kubectl get pods and you just basically up arrow hit enter a couple of times, you'll see that the running pod will start to terminate. Takes it a few seconds. It's basically doing like a graceful shutdown type thing. So give a few here. Could be impatient like me and just hammer the crap out of the up arrow on the enter key. But eventually it will go away. You notice there's no ZVM-service anymore in the list, and we can kind of get started with our SQL stuff. So if you refresh, you're going to see that the service is unavailable. Nginx knows that pod's gone, so not much it can do. The management console was working. That's why I tried to use it first to change the URL of the SQL server. But again, spoiler alert, it was not working. So I'll show you how to do it the super manual way as well. What I'm explaining here is that the management console continues to be up and online. It's not giving us that service unavailable just because it's a different pod. That's one of the advantages of all these little microservices. You can have some that are up and some that are down. So next step, going to SQL. Basically, we want to take the database offline. Then we want to detach it. I'm going to tell it to force all connections to be dropped. This just basically makes sure that none of the other services are connecting to the database. And then I'll go ahead and detach it. At this point, this SQL server doesn't care about like those files anymore. They're just files on a hard drive. They're not in use. And what that'll allow us to do is just copy paste them over to the new SQL server. And by the way, I'm going from SQL 2019 to SQL 2022. So I don't know if all versions are as easy copy paste. I'm not a SQL person. But at least 2019 to 2022 did work. So basically what I do is I go out, find out where my database files are. For me, they're just in the default data folder. So I'm going to copy ZVMDB and ZVMDB_log. And basically, I'm just going to paste those over to the data folder on the SQL 2 server. Obviously, if you installed the data to a different folder, you'll have to talk to your SQL team to know where to drop these files. But for me, it's just, MS SQL data, pretty standard stuff. It's the default. Drop them in there. Now what we can do is basically get rid of SQL 1. We're pretty well done with him. We'll come back, shut it down later in the video. But for the new database server, what we need to do is basically go to the database folder. As you can see, I have no idea what I'm doing in SQL. It's just all guesses. But basically now we just attach the database. So Attach. It will give us the option to click add. We'll go grab that MDF file. That's the actual database. You'll see that it auto finds the log for it, and we can just hit OK. To again show that I know nothing about SQL. I was just trying to make sure that the SA user had permissions for this. Um, Fast forward a little bit. There's a better way to check it. You basically go to logins, right click the user that you want to be able to have access, properties, role mappings, or sorry, user mappings. You'll see that we already have DB owner rights to this database because it's the SA account. If you're using a different account name, you probably have to set that. But now, what I try to do here is just simply update from .63 to .64 and ZSQL1 to ZSQL2. Everything else is technically the same. I have the same username, same password. It does make you re-verify it, and then I hit reconfigure, and basically nothing happens. I assume that, well, it could have been one of two things. I would still say to try this. You notice that the button did go away. I just don't know if it's because of the next problem I have, or if the web GUI is just not working properly. So I would say still try this method. But you notice when I refresh, now all of a sudden it kind of locks up. Again, this could be a symptom of it just not my next mistake. But it could just be that, the service isn't ready to do an external to external migration. I'll have the team look into that a little more. But here in a minute, I'll show you how to do it the other way. And you'll see that I still have problems. And I'm not going to edit this out because these are good troubleshooting steps to go through. And hopefully by seeing me make them, you won't make them. But again, was just trying to get back into the management console. The other microservices in the management console still work. It's just the deployment settings doesn't work. So that's where I'm thinking that maybe it did try to reconfigure and it just wasn't able to do so. So um, I'll I'll put the path to the storage properties XML file in the video description. But basically, that GUI service would just update the same file that I'm going to go to here manually. So it's var data zerto zvr zvm storage, and then it's a file called storageproperties.xml. This file contains the information on how to log into the Zerto database. So if we go in there, we can just use nano. We can, verify that, obviously our database names are still the same. You can see under m underscore server, you, yeah, those are the same. This guy doesn't work as fast as I do on a voiceover. But now you can still see that it has the 63, which needs to be 64, and uh, ZSQL1 needs to be ZSQL2. I don't know if it needs to be uppercase or lowercase, but I went ahead and did that anyway. One of the advantages, let me pause the video a second. One of the advantages here of keeping the same username and password is that I don't need to update the m underscore username or the m underscore user password. I'm not 100% sure if you can just set it to is secure 0 and then just put clear text in there. I don't know if that would work or not. For me, it's just easier to have the same password, at least during this initial migration, so that the same hash value will be able to be used. So save that. And then the next thing I'm going to try to do is scale up the pod, which is the same command as before, except instead of 0, we set it to 1, and that'll tell it to bring a pod back online. So there's the same command, just replace 0 with 1, hit enter. Um, and then what I do is I basically do the get pods command a couple of times to see if the pod is able to start. I'll fast forward a little bit. You notice the pod is there now. It's the bottom line. It's been running for 5 seconds, and it's got no restarts. So that's good. We fast forward here a little bit. Let me jump around a little bit, try to find it. I just try to see if like the management console is still working. Try to look to see if there's any connections to the database. hop forward a little more here. And then eventually I come in and run get pods a few more times. Service is still down. It should not take this long to come back up. That's why I'm kind of clicking around like crazy. Um, but when I do get pods again, you'll see that it restarted. So that means that it crashed. The service wasn't able to start. Um, if I go forward a little farther here, you'll see that basically it crashes again, and eventually it enters a crash loop back off. That's not a good sign. I try to restart the ZVMA, thinking that'll fix it, but then I remembered, hey, you know what? When I did this earlier this morning, I had to make sure that I enabled the TCP because by default, SQL Server tries to be a little more secure, right? So it closes down TCP connections until you enable them manually. So here is kind of where I figured it out. Like, oh wait, I used a name pipe, not a TCP. Let me see if I can connect to this guy locally, meaning on the same machine through TCP, and it doesn't work. And that instantly tells me, hey, I know exactly what I forgot. So I go back down to SQL Management Studio, or sorry, SQL Server Configuration Manager, click on protocols, and sure as shit, TCP IP is set to disable. So I went back in, I checked. Yeah, I thought for sure I did that. You're right, I did. But apparently that's not the same as right clicking and also doing enable. Once I did that, I also had to restart the SQL service because again, it's not going to listen on TCP unless you make sure all that stuff's enabled. I told you it'd be about 15 minutes in. Looks like we're about 17. And yeah, but like this would probably already be done had I not made this super rookie mistake. So I said, if you have a smart SQL guy, this you'd already be done. Hit connect, instantly connects. Super. That's great. So then I log back into the ZVMA. It's already restarted, and basically just start checking the pods. So the one thing I'll say here, the pods will start up, and if other intra-dependencies are not already started, they will still be crashed or errored or unknown or whatever. Um, you know, just sit back in your chair a little bit, give it a little bit more time. Um, these do take a little while to come up. So I think I run uptime here in a minute, and it's been up for like a minute or two. But if it, I would suggest wait 5 minutes, like literally 5 minutes, start a clock from the time if you decide to reboot until you start to kind of worry. So I refreshed this enough that you can kind of see the order. So like Fluent D right now is in a crash back or crash loop back off. But some of the other ones are still in an unknown state. And that means that basically they haven't even tried to start yet, right? And that could be the issue with a lot of the other stuff. So again, just kind of playing around, just waiting on it to get everybody into a running state. Until that happens, we're still going to see some errors and things like that. Um, so now we've got one less error on the Swagger service, still in a crash loop back off. But now our ZVM service has started, and we're just kind of waiting on two more of those services to get going. I think I refresh it like another 400 times, and eventually they'll enter the running state. There's one of them. Last one is the API, the Swagger service. Excuse me. Told you I was having a really bad AV morning. There we go. Now they are all running. Took about 3 minutes, so like I said, give it five. Um, if they're not up in five, then something went wrong. You might want to revert to a snapshot or something like that. But once they're all running, I just check a few more times to make sure that service hasn't restarted. It's been at three for a while now on the ZVM service. Hasn't crashed since the rest of the pods were up. So I'll flip back over here, and you'll see that the GUI's back online. You can log into it, And then same process as we did for internal to external. We want to make sure that we're getting checkpoints, right? The alerts and the errors that I have are just because this VPG had only been created for like an hour this morning, and I've already had it offline for a half hour. So Zerto was basically says, hey, this thing's been protected and it's like less than 50% of the time that it's been protected, I have no checkpoints for. So I need to kick an alert and let you know that something's happening. The fact that there's not a lot of data in the graphs here, that's not surprising. The VRAs will keep chugging along doing what they need to do, but you won't get stats. Important thing here is at 1041 on the clock down there, I'm also getting checkpoints in the VPG. This tells me that it is able to use its database. It's able to do its thing. Um, for all intents and purposes, it is online, and we have successfully migrated from Z-SQL 1 to Z-SQL 2 here in the lab. I ramble on about checkpoints for a little while longer, but then basically just come over here and show you that I am for sure on Z-SQL 2 and that I'm an idiot and I totally forgot to enable TCP. So I just reiterate that, hey, make sure you do this. Otherwise, you're going to have all sorts of connectivity issues. And again, I may actually migrate this back to Z-SQL 1 just to see if the GUI can do it without having to drop down to the command line and stuff like that. Because again, I think that my TCP settings issue probably caused some of that. So I explained some more about the SQL service here. Fast forward a bit. Um, yeah, nothing too fancy there. Eventually, I shut down SQL 1 just to prove that it's not needed anymore. You hop ahead there, shut down. Still getting checkpoints, all that fun stuff. And you notice if you go back to the management console, you'll see the new 64 and SQL 2. If you needed to update the password or something, you could do that here. So, like if you decided now to go back to ZSQL 2, change the SA password, you could just come in here, change the SA password here, and hit reconfigure, and it would go ahead and go in and update the password in that storage properties file. Anyway, sorry about the voiceover. Promise I'll definitely check the mics next time before I do another 25-minute video and have to voice over it. So have a great day. Thanks, everyone.